Democracy, despite its name, actually confers absolute power. That's what I argue in its current format. Gives absolute power. Like I said, the 51% acquires 100% of the powers, which one could argue is not completely democratic.
Hello and welcome to Holistic Circle podcast, Spiritual Conversation. My name is Philipp Kobald. We are reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy. And I'm very thankful to have here today from Jerusalem, Daniel Bookman. Hello, welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Philipp. So happy to be here from Jerusalem, the center of geopolitics right now. We just had a siren warning a few minutes ago.
I wanted just to say, I wish you most of all safety for you and your family in those troubling days. And I am impressed by your courage to sit here peacefully and smart looking while I know what's flying over your head. So all I can do is wish you love and luck and strength to go through these troubling times.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I'm so courageous. I mean, there's not much we can do. And the people flying over, all these soldiers and pilots, they're the courageous ones. We're just, we pray to God that He should look after us and everyone should be well and nobody should get hurt on any side, really.
You know, it's different levels. I'm not traveling to Australia because I might meet a spider. So my level of courageous, you are way up there.
I hear. I'm also scared.
Way up there.
I also don't like spiders.
I don't like anything. I'm the biggest coward ever.
I don't
there
think
you
so.
go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. All right. So, dear viewers, first of all, thank you so much. You know, this is a podcast about spirituality, and we definitely are staying mainly away, if possible, about politics, because you know that from me. But of course, if we have a situation where bombs flying over people's heads, so if you're triggered, if you think that maybe emotionally, God knows what will happen, hopefully it will be all safe and fine. If you think you'll be triggered, then maybe leave this one episode and come back the next time, because I think it's impossible to talk about ethics and morals and religion and whatever things we'll be talking about today, sitting in the middle of a conflict that maybe not one or two references might be happening. And also, if people now will be asking me, and I know there's going to be the next emails I'm going to get later, once this is published today, and people will be saying me, oh, why you invite somebody from Israel and not somebody from Palestine and not somebody? Listen, people, I invite everybody, right?
Right.
So let's stop this nonsense. I inviting everyone, and who wants to come is welcome. And I don't have to say it, but nevertheless, I would like to say it loud and clear, because I've said it before and I wish to say it again. I am, and I've been, and I always will be a friend of Israel, and there can be no question about it. All right. With this, I would very much love if you could give us a quick background of yourself, a little bit of a bio, so we can ease into the conversation.
Right. Myself, I don't know if there's a huge amount to say about me personally. I'm more about the ideas, but I was born, I'm living here in Jerusalem, like you say. I'm practicing as a lawyer. I spend quite a bit of my time also studying the Jewish texts, the religious texts, the Talmud and the Bible. That's considered a primary Jewish obligation and privilege. That's how I've orientated myself. That's partly why I'm in law. It affords me a little bit more time. Background, I was born in Scotland, United Kingdom, in Glasgow. My parents were more religious than most of the community. But there wasn't much of a Jewish education, so they sent me to England at the age of 12 to get a proper Jewish religious education, combined with the firm secular grounding in education. I then went, after I matriculated about the age of 17, 18, to Israel for a couple of years at Rabbinical College, intense studies called Yeshiva in Jerusalem. I then went back to study in England law in university. I then finished my degree, got married, came back to Israel, continued studying in Kollel, it's intense rabbinical studies again, for about 6 or 7 years. I then qualified as a lawyer in the Israeli bar. I worked for a few years in that. I didn't like it. I went out, I went into high tech, requalified as a computer programmer. I then finished with that when I worked for the government and they closed down our division. I tried a little bit of entrepreneurship myself at that time. It didn't work so well. So I went back to law. So since then, about 20 years, I've been practicing law and learning, studying, doing a bit of communal activities. I've written a couple of books like we've discussed, or we will discuss. That's me. I think we have 7 children. Baruch Hashem, as we say, thank God. They're all married even. We have grandchildren. They're all living around here. So I'm very thankful to God for what He's done to us till now. And on the individual and on the communal level, what He's done for the Jewish people in the miracles we see the whole time, which you were being alluding to. That's about it.
Thank you for that very beautiful introduction, and to also maybe help the people along what we'll be talking about here specifically. We will hope to, even in these difficult circumstances, to talk about ethics. And it comes from your religious background. It comes from your background of studying law. Yeah. And it, of course, comes from your background living right now in a place where I think ethics questions every day. So it is a conversation that I'm enormously looking forward to getting your opinion, because one thing is sitting on a Tibetan mountain monastery and be all good and righteous. The other thing is living in Jerusalem the way you do and having all of these influences and all of these everyday questions where one needs to understand one's brains and necessities of security and safety and one's heart for peace and harmony. And I guess this is all what we've been talking about, to help people listening, what people should learn, I hope, from this, your wisdom, our conversation, a little bit better how to navigate these difficult questions within.
Right. Yeah, I hope so. I don't know. It's also possible, I find, with these are deep and profound questions, and not always the answer I give at the first time. I very often go home and think, no, I should have, it was a better answer. I should have said something different. So maybe you'll allow me, I don't know, to correct another time things I say wrong on these profound questions. I'll try to do the best I can.
You should know that you will fail, right?
Okay,
that's the first thing. I'm already being worried, because you don't know that you will fail. And why would we start in the first place?
Right. That's a good, yeah. You have to try and fail. I mean, we have the righteous also try and fall, and then they pick up and we do better.
Exactly. That is the place to, and it's good. That's the podcast is all about. We're talking as humans, and we're talking with our imperfections and all that the people would hopefully learn. So don't listen now. But what people should have learned at the end of the hour is just get up and try and try and try again.
Right. Yeah. I often feel like I'm here. My mission, partly is just we should think, not take everything for granted, to try and inspire, think, thought, deep contemplative, profound thought. That's also worth a lot, I think. And we can save a lot of problems in the world between people if people we would think before we act.
At the end, it's the job of the holy man, or the job of the spiritual person, to have this time, to give himself the time. And as you said yourself, you chose your life path, if I listen correctly, to have a ways and job that gives you time to think. You know that you need, or your body or your soul needs extra time of thinking and contemplating. And since the beginning of time, there were people in the society, it's never the majority, but there were always some people who knew that they have the need to think more deeply and then hopefully inspire others if they're willing to listen.
Right, yeah, you could put it like that. Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of in the middle. There are some people, many people in the community I live, who devote their whole life. They don't work, and they live very minimally on a basic income, and their wives sometimes work to support them, and they devote their whole lives, day and night, for years, just studying the holy books and observing the religious obligations and rituals. So I'm
Let's go right into it. Can you a little bit give us outline the books you wrote? Can you a little bit bring us into the conversation? So before I'm asking my super smart and well thought questions.
I'm getting nervous already. Right. So I've written 2 books. They were written for reasons. I always give this little introduction. We live in quite a insular community where going out even on the internet and broadcasting itself is not always encouraged. So I sort of have to justify. I feel I have to justify to a certain extent. What am I doing here when most people are not going out speaking to the world? And so primarily I feel I have 2 missions. One is about religion. Religion gets quite a bad press all over the world, in Israel as well, there's a lot of tension between the religious and non-religious, the secular. A lot of it, I think, is based on misunderstanding. Religion gets a bad press. It's primitive, it's outdated, it's irrational, it's archaic. So I've made, combined with my trying to understand things for myself, a little mission to try and present things rationally. So I wrote a book called Fundamentally Rational, which tries to present the fundamentals of life and religion in a rational perspective. That's the first book. The second book is also my second, raison d'etre for being here, my justification for being here, is since the October 7th terrorist attack about 2.5 years ago. You know what I mean when I refer to October the 7th, that terrorist attack from Gaza. So the world has been itself in a lot of geopolitical turmoil, and there's been an increase, a significant increase, unfortunately, in antisemitism, Zionism and antisemitism. So I wrote a book, I did a lot of thinking about it, and I wrote a book that's really a response to that, which is it became in the end a book about society, democracy, geopolitics, Israel, anti-Semitism, trying to present a very rational exposition of the themes, the conceptual concepts that undermine the various conflicts that we have in society. And there's quite a lot. There's democracy, the things I mentioned. And that's the two books, really. And actually, there's a confluence between them because a lot of them boil down to ethics and power, I would say.
All right, so you put something on the table. Let's start chewing it slowly, piece by piece,
Okay,
because it's quite a big piece.
Yeah. I don't know how far we'll get, but yeah.
Yes, let's try something because there's a lot of questions that bump in my head. Let's pick any of them without any particular order. For the one thing you say, okay, what is it that brings people to live in that kind of a deep connection with God and to uphold the rules? What is here the emotional connection that you would need this kind of intimacy with God? Where would you put this? Quite random question.
Right, yeah, it's a very broad question, and I would answer it from two perspectives. One from the perspective as a religious Jew, and one maybe from a general perspective. And I think the first answer I have to give as a religious Jew is the God, the creator of the world. That's what we believe. He's the creator of the world, and he mandated religion. He mandated, he didn't create the world for no reason. He created the world for the purpose of man having an opportunity to better himself, to serve God. And we can get into what serving God means from many perspectives. And therefore, I believe that the calling to religion ultimately is itself evidence of the divine. There are many, sociologists and anthropologists would argue otherwise. But from a religious perspective, I'd say that is the evidence, the fact that God is there and God is all powerful and infinite and God has a mission for us. That itself is what inspires a man who is created with that in mind, in inverted commas. That was intention, that was the blueprint. And that is why man is drawn to God, because that is the essence of man. Man was created by God to serve God, which means to be better people. So that's why we seek it. I sort of have a theory in some ways that religion is a lot to do with ethics. It binds us to ethics. It's the means to improving our ethical behavior. That's, I guess, my religious perspective. The general perspective, why are people drawn to religion? I don't know, there are many reasons.
Specific setting, in an intensive setting. Not, I mean, in that intensive community setting. It was not in general like everyone in the world. I mean, in this specific setting that you live, what makes you choose this path than a secular path or a more relaxed path? What do you think draws people to this intensive experience of God?
Mm-hmm. You mean if people have free choice, people who are born into religion, we view it as an obligation. We don't really have a choice. This is what we have to do. It could maybe get into deeper why this is what we have to do. But why would somebody be drawn? It could be religion offers the community, the sense of community. I think if a person is left on their own, let's take the extreme. Robinson Crusoe was placed, Robinson Crusoe? Placed someone on an island with no obligations and no social structure. And let's say they came from an ethical and moral society. How would they fare in such a scenario? And I think it would be time related. Or I have a thought experiment. I used to ask my children, what would happen if you're on a spaceship and you were provided with everything? And then after a certain amount of time, you were in control, you were in communication with Earth. And then they told you there's been a malfunction and your spaceship is going to leave the atmosphere, and you're never going to be able to return to Earth, nor are you going to be able to communicate with anyone ever again, but you're going to be provided with absolutely everything you ever could need on a physical, material level. How would a person fare with that? Would they maintain their ethical self? And taking that extreme example, I think a person would be hard-pressed to. The more perhaps you had been inculcated with living the right life, you would have a greater chance of preserving it for a longer time. But everyone, I think, would experience a spiritual and moral erosion of their ethical, moral, religious, believing self over time. I think it would be inevitable. And therefore, I think that's why maybe we need community, we need the intensity. This is my sort of short thinking answer, that without that, there is the innate understanding that over time, we cannot maintain, however much we claim to be spiritual and ethical and moral, without a context, without something to keep us going, to motivate us, it's going to be challenging. And ultimately, it's going to, the trajectory is going to be downwards for most people over a long term. Maybe a year, 5 years, but after 50 years, you'll have children. Maybe after 100 years, who knows what's going to be. No one can take responsibility and say, I'm going to remain a good person. That's I'm saying it in quite an extreme form. Yeah.
This answer very much resonates with my own personal findings, which are, of course, not as intensive, to see that some people have a greater need for community and for love and family. And this always, I see, is a very strong motivation for a deeper, also religious experience. That's at least one of the things I've been finding. And it's much less eloquently put than you.
Not at all.
But it is something that fascinates me, and especially the Jewish community, who've been under so much pressure over the last more than 1,000 years. They had to build this strong network, this strong intimacy among as a group, and that I think explains a lot how you express your faith through the experience of the last 1,000 years. Would you see that connection, that this is still living on as a generational trauma within, that you're seeking this intense family, this intense group, spiritual group, or you think it's just within the faith itself?
I hear what you're saying. You're saying, is community, has Jewish religion emphasized community as a survival means, as a means of finding security in the context of a hostile world? Or is it something that enhances us?
Inherent in the faith.
Right. So it brings me to an interesting thought. So first of all, I think there's no denying that the security that comes from community can't be denied. And maybe that has forged the Jewish sense of community. After the last 2,000 years, we've been in exile. And therefore, we haven't had the security of a sovereign nation. And therefore, we've been forced to survive in an alien world. I think community, there's been no choice other than to align ourselves with community. And the society itself also contributed to that. Society often forced the Jews, viewing them as an alien element within society, confined them to the ghetto walls. So it was almost like it was imposed upon society. And maybe one could say that was providential. God realized that was necessary for the Jews to preserve their cultural and religious heritage. And therefore he put them, he said, okay, I'm going to put you in a ghetto where you can draw from each other. That's on the negative, like on the avoiding harm aspect of society, of communal living. However, I think there is a more deep positive, and I view it. I've had this thought quite intensely, that I think all relationships, it's part of a thought process. All relationships, why are we drawn to? I asked this question: why are we drawn to relationships? Why are human beings? Why do they seek social connection? Why do we seek relationships? So I'm cutting a short story short, a long story short, and I've even viewed it as marriage is that we seek a relationship because really what we seek is to be the best person we can be. We're seeking to improve our ethical selves. And a relationship is without a relationship, you can't be a good person. Without a relationship, you'll tend towards selfishness. And the comfort of a relationship and of community is that it requires you to adapt yourself ethically, to improve yourself, to be empathetic and sensitive to the needs of others. And that is ultimately what a person, that is the deeper meaning behind of life itself. I think that's why that's why we seek marriage. And if you want to get into that, it's really what marriage is about, in my opinion. I'll give you two examples. I asked the following question just to illustrate it, if I may. When a child is born, it's normally, for most people, it's an experience of great emotional joy. When a child gets married, it's an occasion of great joy, but it's also very often accompanied with a certain sadness, tears. People cry at the marriage. The parents often cry at the marriage. They don't cry the same way often when a child is born. Would you agree with that sentiment, with that observation?
My daughter is 12 and I only have one. I'm
Married
still
well.
waiting for that day.
Right. So that's been my experience, and I think, can you relate to that observation, or?
Only from Hollywood movies.
Okay, whatever that's worth. But is that what they portray? Is that do they
Yes.
portray that?
That's what they do.
Right. So okay. So I'm arguing that the birth of a child, one of the great joys of a birth of child, is in actual fact, it's one of the great motivators of extricating a person from their own selfishness. Because a child being born represents a tremendous undertaking, an obligation. The person obligates themselves in bringing a child into the world, that you're going to have to fend and look after for this the welfare of this child for the next 10, 20 years, whatever it is, and he's totally dependent on you. That requires you to move very far beyond your selfish essence. And whereas when the child, and that's why you see, that's the great happiness. I believe that's the great joy. It's the joy of finding the meaning of the means to motivate yourself to be a better person. That's really what we seek ultimately. I believe that's the existential essence of a person, is to aspire to be a better person. And we seek friendship, we seek family, because that's the most intense environment in which we can excel as selfless people. Therefore, for example, I say when a child gets married, leaves the home, there's a certain element of worry, nostalgia. What's going to be with me, with the selfless me? I now only have myself to deal with to a certain extent, or less obligations incumbent upon me. Maybe I'm going to revert back to my selfish self. So coming back to your question, and there's a lot to talk about this, but in a very brief way, I think that's what the society is about. The intense experience of society is something that also helps us develop in a very intense environment, and we can take that for good or not.
As a quick reflection, and maybe it's unfair if I say it in that way, and most probably it is unfair.
No.
But
can I sip
most
my
people yeah, please. Most people I hear and think and talk like this are usually people who are either great spiritual seekers or quite religiously connected people. It is obviously some truths within some people of society who have that need for God or have that need to answer these spiritual questions, which, if the answer is correctly, leads to a more moral or a more ethic being. And that's an interesting one. So let's step aside for the moment from this conversation and look at the theory versus practice. So we're basically jumping a little bit back and forward in the conversation, but we know what's right, but what can be done is sometimes painstakingly different. So let's then jump right, I guess, into your book, or part of your book. I guess this is what your book will be about in a big portion.
Mm-hmm.
How to navigate one's dream or wishes for love, community, and being righteous, and then one's necessity to protect one's family and to deal with the real world. Where is this? How to navigate?
Well, I think you're envisaging two scenarios. I mean, I don't know if you're alluding, sometimes you have to act aggressively to protect, and that certainly creates a powerful conflict. But before we get to that more extreme scenario, I think you're talking about the person leading the religious life of sitting and contemplating, and actually going out and in the real world and whatever you have to do to entrepreneurship or to make a living. That's what you're referring to. Is that what?
Soft question, the soft part of the question, yes.
Right. So does that need to, so do you think that's more readily understandable? and I think it's very much harmonious. If a person chooses to undertake making a living, and it's done for the purpose of supporting a family, a wife and children, then that's almost inherently an ethical enterprise from start to finish. So you could say everything you're doing essentially is for the purpose of providing for others. It's training you to be more intensely sensitive to the needs of others. I don't think that's much question. I argue even further in the book. I said that the way the society is set up, that we have to work for a living. Yeah, that's the way society is. So if you think about what working is, essentially is providing for the needs of others. So I argue that essentially that's a testimony to the orientation of mankind to bettering ourselves. That even if you're a lawyer, a doctor, a plumber, whatever it is, a teacher, a service provider, whatever it is, you are always catering for the needs of others. And that's why these things are so important, and maybe why society developed these things. These are all means we're engaging constantly in providing for the needs for others, in whichever framework, for the family or for society in general. It's all about self-improvement. Being a good doctor means being a good person, helping others. Yes, there is remuneration. So one can view it, one has the free choice. How do you want to view it? Are you viewing it as, I just want to do this as a means of earning money? Or no, the money is just really the means to motivate me. But fundamentally, it's to enable me to have a more meaningful, productive, and ethical life in looking after the needs of others.
That would be interesting. I mean, sorry, but of course, you are trained as a lawyer by profession, and one can hear it here very strongly. That is definitely very obvious. But one would argue in a small community where there's maybe one or two lawyers, and right, a person who is molesting children is going in front of court and will seek your services, and you're the father of a daughter. Right. You're doing a good lawyer, you know how to get him out of jail, but what will happen tomorrow night? So it is
moral conflicts. Yes. I personally am not a criminal lawyer, so I would not be involved in that. I keep clear of these things. I'm not even a litigator. I'm more a business lawyer, real estate. If anyone wants to do business,
that's so much better. Yeah.
It's partly consciously why I avoided that. You have to do a lot of dealing with the truth and speaking the truth and to protect people. And like you're saying, dealing with people who are known criminals, is that appropriate to be doing that? Yes, these are profound moral conflicts, dilemmas.
Then let's make it easy. You work for a company who clearly as a business lawyer, and you know that company is polluting the water of your community. So let's stay away from criminalities. It is those conflicts that are fascinating me, that ones that we feel are right, know to be right. And being in this framework, as you said, the society makes you have to earn money, you have to do all of this, brings you in this moral corruption. And as you said, you have people in your specific group said, I don't care, I just need a little basic income. I want to devote myself to God, and I want to live a truly righteous life from the way I understand it. So this is the complexity that we have.
Yeah. Very good. Let me focus that on a very intense moral dilemma, which you're interesting. It brings to mind. It occurs in Israel, not seldomly. That you have, let's say, a terrorist who's involved in a terrorist attack, and he's perpetrated the most horrific harm and injury on others for maybe no reason whatsoever. In fact, apart from the fact that they're Jews or Israelis, and he gets himself severely injured in the terrorist attack by the soldiers, let's say, or whatever. And he's lying there bleeding, and paramedics, Jewish Israeli paramedics, come along, and they have this dilemma: do we treat him? Do we relieve his pain? Do we save his life? That, I think, is taking the moral dilemma that you're talking about in an extremely intense context. And so how does one resolve that? So what I understand, people often say that this is my duty. I'm a paramedic. I can't take into consideration the broader moral framework, because like a doctor, the Hippocratic Oath says that I have to treat whatever. I can't start making moral judgments. Therefore, my duty is to treat. So in those cases, would that be right or not? I don't know. I'd have to have a deep think about that, and I think it would depend from case to case. If somebody, God forbid, came in and murdered one's family, and then one is got the dilemma: do we treat them to save their life and then bring them to justice, or we let them die? And there have been cases. It caused a lot of political turmoil in Israel where an Israeli soldier killed a terrorist who had been already disarmed. He was helpless, and the Israeli soldier who was patrolling at the time actually fired on him. That was the basic, I think, agreed factual context. And it caused a great debate in Israel. Was that the right thing to do? So and bring it to the context of a lawyer, I think everyone has, and in the end, everyone draws, and religiously, we'd ask the rabbis, where do we draw the line? Where is that considered in breach of, where can we sort of turn a blind eye to a certain extent and say, I don't know what he's doing, I don't need to know what he's doing? And where does there come a point we have to say, no, this is not compatible with my moral religious obligations, and I have to say no. And
May I stop you here, because you really put my next question on the table. And anyway, you can continue once I just asked my question.
No, sure.
Because you so nicely said to me, we go and ask the rabbi. Thank you. Now we arrived on basically the question I was building up to.
Oh, great.
In a sense.
Yeah.
See, that's you. Thank you so much for making it wonderful, because that's what then all boils down to. I think people understand the moral dilemma, and I say my mantra to every problem: the Greeks are guilty. So it's simple solution to everything is the Greeks.
Yeah.
And but this we understand the dilemma, everyone who listens now. But then you said, we asked the rabbi, while secular people would go in the madness of law and contradiction and so forth. So this is basically where I wanted to also come on an ethical question. Who is here the right person to address, the rabbi or the book of law? What would you say to that?
In the Jewish religion, I don't think that's incompatible. The rabbi himself will generally be the primary source, the authority of what the Jewish sources say. He will have spent his life absorbing the material, learning the specific material, developing his own religious, ethical approach. That's always a part of it, because you can have two rabbis and you can ask them the same question and you'll get a different answer, even though they've both reviewed the same texts, because there will be different answers and there will be different responses and different possibilities. So it's never going to be black and white. Why? Between the law and the rabbi, that dichotomy between the law and the rabbi, I don't think there's a. Maybe what you mean is I could research the law and reach my own conclusions, and if I asked the rabbi, he would have his conclusions. So maybe you're saying, should I seek the answers myself? Maybe that's your question, rather than deferring to an objective higher authority. Is that maybe what your question might be?
A lot of questions here. There's more than two. This is a question within a question, packed in a lot of questions, because this is, I think, an interesting one. So many people watching here, 90% of my viewers are US citizens, right?
Right.
So that's the massive bulk of my viewers. And we're drowning in ethical question. Should we have rabbis or priests or religious authorities have them more giving us the structure in ethics, which then leads to law and things like that? Should we accept the authority because they're men of God? And as you said, they study the scripture. But what is with my own personal search for God and my personal divine information that I might be receiving for prayer? What is with that? Or should society look on this technical, mathematical approach? And I think we are part in this turmoil. And I have a sense that what was clear the last 100 years or so, in a sense, is shattering right now. And to me, this is at least some feeling that what was clear the last 100 years, we have constitution, we work on it, and we're building it, that this is becoming under enormous pressure. Maybe the ethical question with climate change and so forth are getting more severe, so that we are having a feeling that we need deeper clarity or more sources of information. I see you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
No, because there's a lot to think about. I don't know if I'm going to be able to absorb all of that and offer an integrated answer. There's a lot there. I mean, I heard two main questions. Like, one is, should we be looking to religious authority to guide us in all of our questions, and to what extent in society in general? So is one maybe for those who accept religious authority, and one is for society as a whole. which brings us to the observation that society itself, like you're saying, is becoming, religion itself is on the defensive, which is, the tremendous division in society. I see it largely falling along religious and secular anti-religious fault line. America is almost like equally divided between the religious and anti-religious. So the question, to what extent can we impose religion in a democracy upon a non-willing majority or minority who is non-religious, that's almost a political question of control and power. And since it's becoming increasingly antagonistic towards religion, the anti-religious camp, then politically it doesn't really work. The founding fathers emphasized, yes, that religion and state there should not be a religious imposition on state, but the secular part of society, or certain elements of it, the more radical elements, have radically opposed any allusion to religion within society. And I discuss in my book Deep Reasons for that. I don't know if we'll get into that. So I'm taking that question on a political level, first of all, and it's challenging. I don't know. You have to, it's whatever democracy will allow you. I've got a chapter about reforming democracy itself.
Give it to us. Give it to us.
Okay,
if you have time.
Not to jump. Okay, so I start. Okay, I'm going to start. It's chapter 10 in the second book. I start with the premise that why is society so divided? Why is it society seems to be so divided, particularly in America and Western society, in Israel, in America, in Britain, Germany, Hungary, many places, Spain. Society is very divided between left and right. And I make the observation that, and I think it's relevant for many contexts, even between Israel and the Arab neighbors, that people on the street, the normal person, me and you, or me, whoever it is, maybe even me and a Palestinian, if we're removed from our political context, we could probably get on very nicely. People from the left and people on the right in America and Israel, religious, non-religious, in many contexts, they function together very well, harmoniously, whether it's in the workplace, in institutions and hospitals, whatever it is, on the bus, in shops, they get on very well. There's no conflict. The ideological conflicts of left and right, religious, non-religious, whatever it is, do not seem to impact on the day-to-day. So I argue that the division in society, which is portrayed to us by the media, is to a certain extent an illusion. I've argued it's an illusion to a certain extent. But what creates the illusion? When does this division become very manifest? When it comes to politics. When we speak about politics, it's left and right, it's about power, it's about elections. Who's going to be in power? That really is what divides us. So I argue very briefly that in actual fact, what is dividing us is the power game, the power struggle itself. Who's going to have the power, the ultimate power of government? That's really what motivates, intensifies the division, not the ideological or religious or whatever theological or philosophical differences. They're not what accounts for the difference, because that we can resolve that. We can get on. It's when it comes to it has a material difference of power. Power is the most powerful motivating factor and divisive factor. That's what I argue. And I say, therefore, democracy itself is to a certain extent responsible. Because if you think about it, when you have elections, the election is about who's going to be in power and how much generally in most societies, most Western democracies, how much of the representative vote you have to require to acquire power. Generally 51%. Generally, once you've achieved 51% of the vote, you are going to be the ruling government. And how much power does that give you? Essentially gives you 100% of power. You are the government, the elected government. You can enact whatever legislation, whatever secondary legislation, appoint whatever appointees you make within the system, essentially is all yours. So you've attained absolute power. And therefore, elections are a struggle for absolute power of the 51% over the 49%. That renders the 49%, the potential who's going to be in the minority, extremely sensitive that they're going to be surrendering absolute power, which is what makes this so toxic and divisive. That's what I argue. And I propose a solution based on that. First of all, are you with me till now? Do
Sure.
It makes sense what I'm saying. Does it? I mean, I'm not saying you have to agree.
That remains to be seen. But give us the solution before.
No, because I already made one argument that the solution might not be a solution, might be a solution. But the argument is that's the source of division. I argue in many contexts, geopolitics as well, in society, that is the real division. The division is about power itself. So that's what divides us. Divides us is the allure of power the quest for absolute power, because democracy, despite its name, actually confers absolute power. That's what I argue in its current format. Gives absolute power. Like I said, the 51% acquires 100% of the powers, which one could argue is not completely democratic. And therefore, very briefly, I'll give you the overall concept, and then I could flush it out with like 5 or 6 points. But the overall concept is that that's really not the best expression of democracy. And I argue that this is really an inheritance from monarchy. The democracy developed from the monarchy. The monarchy was a dictatorship. It wasn't chosen or elected, and he had absolute power. So we've sort of taken that model and applied it. We've said democracy is choosing your monarch. That's how I defined it. You're choosing your dictator. You're 51%, and your president, who's on top of all of that, he has absolute power. So once every 4 or 5 years, you get to decide who should be the dictator of the monarch. What I'm saying, if you want real democracy, maybe its next evolution should be a more democratic model, in which essentially even the 49%, the minority, really have a fundamental say in how the country should be run. So instead of it being voting for a government that represents the majority and they do whatever they want, you should be voting on issues maybe. It should be very much, you should take all the issues for the election, you should place them on a plate, the general policies, everyone should vote, and you'll get a certain composite picture of the public's view on all of the issues. For example, let me take one example. Let's say you take education. You'll have a vote about the policy in education. To what extent should parents have entitlement to a say in education? To what extent should education include religious education and science and the dilemma and the question between religion and science? The public could vote on that. That would be part of the general election. And let's say there would be a result that would say that 40% of the public are pro and 60 are against. And it would actually be graded. I'm trying to simplify it. But therefore, based on that, the educational policy of the elected government would have to reflect that 60-40 preference of the public. And that would result in the fact that even the 40% of the public would not feel disenfranchised. They would feel they have a voice. Their 40% actually does count. It's not an all or nothing. It's not that our democratic right means in 5 years' time we'll have another chance. It means, no, you're not zero now. You're absolute 40%, and your voice counts every vote counts will impact on the form of legislation this state will take. That's in a nutshell, very briefly, my problem, my analysis of the problem, my suggested solution, which I could flush out if you would be interested.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And two things I would have to say. Unfortunately, we don't have another 3 hours because I would love to.
I'm sorry if I've taken too much time. Yeah.
No. I would love to be your sparring partner on this one because I'd had 1,005 things to say on that.
I'd love,
but the main thing is for our viewers who are still with us. That's exactly why I'm so happy with this particular episode of my podcast series. Because yes, I have a lot of religious leaders. I have all kind of people coming. But from time to time, we must have people who are more into philosophy, into thinking, just to see that it's all well in theory. We can all read a spiritual book and we all feel warm and fuzzy. But then once we try to bring it into real life and real application, things get horribly complicated to implement it in one's family, in one's community, in one's state. And that's basically the job of serious men and women, of course, serious people to
grow,
to bring this spirituality and test it in the real world. And that's always has to be dealt with the biggest respect, because only that's the way society can move forward, I think, ultimately.
Absolutely.
So that's the one thing. And maybe quick before we go too deep into democratic systems. Well, of course, you have a valid suggestion, 100%. There's nothing to argue with that this is a possible solution to the problem, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that Switzerland is very close to what you propose anyway.
Yes, I know that.
From a European perspective. Secondly, that the Anglo-Saxon system, like in Great Britain or United States and other countries where 51 gives you absolute power, most countries in Europe don't have that. So we just don't have this at all, or theoretically, but practically we don't have 51%, because most countries like Denmark, they have 12 parties in the parliament, and none of them is bigger, I think, than 15%.
Yeah, but they make coalitions that have to acquire about 50% of the vote, and then they're the absolute majority.
Yes, but a coalition of 6 parties is, in its sense, completely democratic. You cannot combine this, I think, with absolute.
It's not quite the same. I would push back, if I may, on that. That let's say you formed a coalition, and those who are not in the coalition are thereby completely disenfranchised. They have no say. Yes,
Right.
at the time of negotiating the coalition, everyone potentially can have a say. But once it's been decided, this is the government. It's not always stable, but that's it. Those who are not in the government, they have no say.
And I would push back quickly. It's all about accountability, because I'm a businessman most of my life.
Yeah.
And, if I do it right, I make a lot of money. If I do it wrong, I lose my house, I lose my everything. I'm all in. And sometimes you have my employees, or sometimes have a lot of employees, and they make suggestion. And yes, I do listen, but ultimately it's my money that's on the table. And some of my employees understand that if I say yes, it's yes. If I say no, it's no. Even if they bring good arguments to the table, I have to trust, because it's accountability. And if I follow them, it's just not how. So I also understand a little bit. I get you, and I think it's wonderful suggestion and super valid. But I'm very much worried that, for example, in my country back home, we already hardly have any accountability left.
Right.
Because every minister has 3 advisors, and the advisors have an advisory board, and we have not one person deciding, we have 2 people deciding. Now we have a commission deciding. So I can see that in my country, for example, really no one anymore is trying to say yes or no. Even doctors in the hospital, they never say, oh, you're healthy or you're sick. It's always like maybe some other tests could point to some indication we cannot see right now. All of these certain I'm sorry. Now I'm wasting time.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, I would respond to that. There's two. You're talking in society itself, accountability. People don't want to be accountable. They don't want to take responsibility. And within government, you're saying accountability. In government, I'll just very briefly respond. In government, my argument is I would have to speak longer, is that the system will increase accountability in actual fact. Because when you're looking just for power for your own sake, then you're going to do everything to avoid accountability. You're going to do everything to preserve your own power. I'm arguing that my model would encourage people to be in power for the benefit of society. They would be more accountable, not for power itself, because there is less power involved. You're not acquiring absolute power, and therefore it's more about the agenda in society, and that maybe can impact on society. Yeah, we have to create better people, more ethical people.
I will worry a lot with your system. For example, my first argument would be that we have less and less democratic media or free journalism. So who would give the information so people can qualified make their own decisions? Because that's becoming a real problem, and that comes back to our conversation. This is an elegant way to bring it back to not lose our audience with arguing about democracy. Actually, there's something I wanted to say right from the start. And if it's permitted, because I would very much like to get your opinion on it, if it is now, we'll definitely talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm so sorry if that triggers. So please, let's say goodbye. Not you, the audience. Okay. You live with it every day. You're fine.
We pray every day.
There's one thing that's something that really surprised me when this October thing and so forth became, and all of it after. I'm an old man. I'm 53 years old, and I come back from a time when we had serious newspapers and we had free journalism. And I was reading the great European newspapers and British newspapers. And I remember I was very political when I was young. And I took great pride in trying to understand the conflict. And for me, as a person, it meant reading what the left side has to say, reading what the right side has to say, and then reflecting in myself, and then ultimately coming to my personal choice. And you can say I'm neutral, or you can say I support this side. I understand the suffering from the others, but I made my choice to be on this side or on the other side, and we can argue,
or both.
But we're doing this from a place of trying to understand.
Right. Yeah.
So And when this conflict started in the media, I was absolutely in shock, looking
Yeah.
at TikTok, looking at Instagram, looking at all of these things. And I know you're seeing it, and that's absolutely fair enough. You will view this from the lens of anti-Semitism, and that's absolutely valid. But
Right.
I was much more in shock to look at young, educated people, students, people I know who have education, and then looking some emotional 30 seconds video and then saying, oh, Israelis are bad, or the Palestinians should have never done it. Whatever their position is,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for me, I felt deeply, deeply sad that you speak up with such a conviction after 30 seconds of education.
Right,
It
right.
just broke my heart.
Right, yeah. That's what we started with. I said my mission to a certain extent is to try and help us to think before we speak and act. And then what you're observing is that seems to be lacking sorely in society less and less, as the media has conditioned us not to think, but to evoke emotional reactions immediately. So yeah, we've lost our ability to think critically and objectively.
So much of the new called anti-Semitism that you are referring to,
Yeah.
I just think people have no idea. Today they're anti-Semitists, tomorrow they're against people with big feet. It's just not serious anymore. Serious for you when people
Yeah,
throw
yeah,
bombs. Serious for
yeah.
you if you're
Yeah.
walking on the street somewhere in Europe and people
Mhm.
attack you or say bad things.
Yeah.
It's serious consequences,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I less and less can't take these people serious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have devoted a few chapters actually. We didn't really touch on it to trying to understand why it is such a powerful negative influence, the anti-Semitic dialogue and the thought process. Why it seems to be so prevalent and so intense. And it needs to be understood very deeply. I think why people view the Jews almost with such impassioned, either positive or negatively. It needs understanding what.
Honestly, I'm with you, but I say right now in this world, for the majority of anti-Semitism, I just think they're very less educated.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think there is. Yeah,
Nothing less.
yeah.
And no bother to go into it, no bother to read, no bother to. They don't know anything about the Jewish faith. They don't know anything about the Jewish society.
Right.
They know absolutely nothing about Jewish rituals or heritage or historic whatever. It's just emotional bombing. It's
Yeah,
just propaganda that they
yeah,
absorb without any energy
yeah, yeah,
to actually. And today it's anti-Jewish, tomorrow it's against Coca-Cola, water in India, and the next day it's just fashion. It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
fashion.
No, you have the famous dynamic that you have these intense anti-Semites, and they have Jewish friends, and they're very friendly with them. And the friends ask them, you're this intense anti-Semite, but you're my friend. So they say yes, because not all Jews are like you. You're different. It's always like that. Once you get to know them, like you're saying, it's because you don't know. It's ignorance. But once you get to know them, then you see that everyone is human beings and good people, essentially.
There's a famous number in my country. We have a lot of communities who are quite anti-immigration, and funny, these are the communities who have zero to none immigrants. It's usually in the countryside, some little village, some in the middle of Austria where there's no immigrants whatsoever. And there you have such a strong anti-immigration voting. And then we have communities in bigger cities that are a bit more mixed. They have very little anti-immigration voters because, they live with them for real.
I hear. That's an interesting observation. I hear. Interesting. Yeah.
It's the fear, it's the ignorance, it's the education. And that
That,
brings me back to the last thing, and then I leave the floor open to you. And that brings me back to your model. I don't worry that we can improve democracy, but right now I'm really worried about media and education and the basics of, and this discussion that you and me are having now, places for open discussion. And thank you for coming from your community to want to be in the world and engage. And I think it's so important. And this is what is lacking. So with this, I leave the floor open. We have another 6, 7, 10 minutes. If I've forgotten to ask something important about your book, or if there are some messages that your conclusions you want to draw or reflections, I basically give the floor to you.
yeah.
And one more time, wish you and your family safety over the coming weeks. And I hope, and I'm sure we all pray for peace, just peace, hopefully. And with this, Daniel, I would be happy to give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Philip, for the time. I don't know if I have 6 minutes, not at all. And just my response, maybe my first of all, thank you very much for the honor of being here, the privilege. I hope I've used it responsibly and positively. Responding to your lamenting the media, a lot of the moral disintegration, I think, can be attributed in society, can be attributable to the media, freedom of speech. In Jewish law, we have strict laws which govern speech, what you're allowed to talk about. Speaking negatively about people is something that is not allowed. There's many people devote a lot of their time to studying these laws. And in other words, the question in society, are you allowed to speech that is inciting to violence? That's what's banned. That's what's considered wrong. But religion, this maybe brings out to a certain extent what religion is about. Religion starts far before that. It says that even religiously, you're not meant to speak gossip or negatively about anyone. You shouldn't be speaking unless there's very good reason, necessity to speak in any way negative about anyone. You shouldn't do that. In the context, for example, of marriages, we have what's called arranged marriages in our community. You don't casually meet, boy and girl casually meet. It's normally arranged by parents. And in order to facilitate that, you have to make inquiries about the potential suitor, potential boy or girl, and their family. And in order to do that, you have to find out, is there any negative information that might pertain to this family, which can involve negative speech? So there are many laws governing in what context are you allowed to say something negative about something. You know some detail that's negative about someone, you're asked about them, can you say? And there's strict rules about what's permissible and what's not, what's absolutely necessary and how you say it, etc. So I'm saying religion really starts with that, with governing speech at the basic level of ensuring that it's positive. If you have that responsibility, that personal responsibility on speech, that should ultimately translate into a healthier media in which people are responsible and they don't actively think, they don't think for themselves. I'm a law to myself. This freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, I can say whatever I want so long as I'm not actively inciting to violence. When you've got that mindset, and the mindset that the more clicks I get, the more views I get, the more dramatic I am, the more successful I am, then that model is obviously going to lead to a complete lack of moral rules and guidelines and limitations. And the most violent and the most extreme and the most morally degraded speech is the one that acquires the most attention. So I think it boils down to personal morals and imposing that personal discipline within the realm of speech itself is what's necessary. I don't see how we can, without that, how we can hope to reform the dialogue within society.
That is exactly what we all need to hear. And I thank you for struggling with me, with my question. And thank you for coming from even a semi-close community and saying, no, I need to justify my speaking. And I want to speak because this is how we bring peace and understanding and knowledge among each others. And it's how we also do a great good, hopefully, when people are with us and we don't maybe like to hear what everyone has to say at every given point, but the healing of hearing it is precedent to better than everything else.
Hopefully.
With this, thank you so much for applied ethics conversation. And I hope people got an inkling how much fun it is to fight with those moral questions and how hopeless it is to ever come to a conclusion.
I agree with that. Thank you very much, Philip, again. And I'll wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. That's what we say here, which means have a good Sabbath. It's now Friday. So everyone should have a restful, peaceful time, a weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.